Sousa, and today I'm going to show you how to create an isometric illustration on Affinity Designer for the iPad. Hope you enjoy it. Normally it's always a good idea to start with a sketch so that you have a good understanding of what you want to do. It doesn't need to be perfect, just a rough one would do. And I'm setting up a grid, a 25-point grid. I'm also turning on the Snap to Grid feature at the bottom left corner. And now what I'm doing is, while using enabling planes on the menu and switching between top, side and front plane so that I can build a rectangle that is going to be my reference in terms of the colors. It's always a good idea to use the same color on the front plane, use the same color on the side plane, and same for the top plane. So everything is, the lighting is consistent throughout the illustration. Once I have that, I just pick a couple more colors that I want to use for a few different bits. And it's always good to group everything and name the layers so that it keeps it organized. It can get pretty messy pretty soon. So what I'm doing now is creating the base for the building. Always switching between the front, side and top plane. It's a gigantic time saver if you use these simple tools, and combined with the Snap to Grid, it's just amazing for isometric illustration. Same thing for the building itself. I'm just switching between those options to build a cube. Again, grouping everything together and naming things. Once you get 1,000 different layers, if you have a good organization, you're gonna be thankful for the time you wasted naming stuff. Now as I go along, so my process is more or less like I add layers instead of just adding a lot of details to a specific part of the illustration. I'm layering it with the basics, and then at the end, that's when I'm gonna add a lot of detail. So I'm building the door here, and while using the planes, I'm also gonna mask the insides of the door just by dragging it on top of the main shape, and it's gonna automatically mask it. So masking in Affinity Designer is incredibly easy. Same process for the window. So bottom plane, top plane to create the bottom part of the window, and then side plane for the side of the window, and then masking everything so that it hides the parts that I don't want to show. And finally the same thing for this last window. For the top part, I want it to look like it has some sort of wall. I wanted to give it some sort of depth. So I'm creating a small wall there where I'm gonna put an AC as well, and creating a cube for the AC, and then using the same principles but using a circular shape. I'm gonna finish it off. I really like creating these moody illustrations. It's almost like while I'm designing them, I'm there, and it's the same feeling you have when you read a book. You're immersed in that world for a bit, and because I really like traveling, just imagining these places and imagining that I'm there, it's almost therapeutic. This makes even more sense in times like these. So now that I have more or less a basis for the building, I'm gonna start adding more and more details. First, I'm gonna add a sign for the store. Again, using the same tools. Now I'm going to create a box with a slider, different technique. I'm not going to use the planes method. I'm just going to use the vector tool to create it to the grid. I'm kind of eyeballing it here, but sometimes it's the best to zoom out and see what feels right. So I'm adding a little bit more space to the bottom. It was a bit too tight, and it wasn't giving me enough space to build the box in the front. So I'm adjusting that. And I'm going to do the same thing on the side, but with an AC, a second AC. I remember when I first started doing isometric, and it was a real pain because it was really hard to keep everything in the right place and make sure that every point connected and that it was making sense. With these kinds of tools that Affinity has, it increased the pace that I work with. It's just amazing. Because that side of the illustration seemed a little bit empty, so I'm adding that. I don't want to add too many items to that part of the illustration, but just enough to make it look interesting. And then the front bit is the same color as the background. I think that negative space looks really interesting. I'm building the side of the store a little bit more. So for the top part of this, I'm not using the plane again. I'm just freestyling it with the pen tool. But it also helps to have the snap to grid feature active, because it makes it much more precise. You don't have to adjust pixels afterwards. They're just going to be on the right place. So now I have what I think it's a pretty good basis. I'm gonna add even more detail, like a small sewer at the front. I think these little things add a lot, and this is what makes a difference at the end. If you look at something unexpected in the corner. So I'm building up the sign with the text tool that Affinity provides. I'm editing in plane, so in the isometric perspective. There's a lot of font options in Affinity, so there's plenty to choose from. And then I'm gonna change the color to the A so that it looks like it's not functioning properly. And then this is a bit of a hack. I don't know if there's a better way of doing this, but with this front plane active, I'm just building a rectangle and a circle to give the illusion that it's a tube. I'm adding some lights from the window. Same for the door. An open sign, I'm adding an open sign here. A little credit card sign. Then playing around with blend tools to see if anything feels right. With the planes enabled, I'm gonna add the open copy and keep adding these lights to the front and side of the illustration here and there. I think they look pretty cool. Same for the sidewalk. I'm just decreasing the transparency so it looks like it's a bit more far away than the other ones. I'm just trying to keep everything organized as I go. I'll be adding another light here. And as you can see, it's just sometimes you just eyeball it and see what feels right. Just zoom out and see how it feels. And the process is sometimes pretty chaotic. I'll just be randomly adding details here and there as I come up with them. So there's not really a linear process. It's just that I'll keep going back to different elements and see where can I be adding, but without adding too much. I think editing is also really important because if it feels too busy, it's not going to be successful as well. So it's just striking that balance between having enough detail to be interesting, but not too much detail that it feels really noisy and confusing. And I'm gonna add some more lights. This one is gonna go behind the AC so that obviously the AC looks like it's in front of it. Then I'm gonna change the transparency of it so it's consistent with the one on the front side. Now I'm gonna add the famous Coke wave, but it's gonna look all weird. So I'm just gonna leave that for now because I wanna fix it, but I wanna focus on other things for now. So I'm just gonna leave it there and pick it back up at the end. I'm gonna add some masks to the sides. So what I'm doing is creating one big rectangle and then a smaller one with the white and masking it inside the bigger rectangle. And then masking all of that inside the window. Now I'm gonna create a few lights for the exterior of the building. So a bigger light and then a smaller one inside it, a smaller circle inside it with some effects, so blurriness. And then what I wanted to do for the light was that I didn't want it to feel like I didn't want to add an outer glow to the circle. I wanted to not feel very perfect, so I added a third circle and give it blurriness. The cable, at first it's straight and then I'm adding some Now what I'm trying to do is add some shadows on the back of the AC. And the cable connecting it to the side of the building. Again, I'm going to use the same hack that I used for the sign. So building a rectangle and circle just to give it that illusion of dimension. And then a shadow behind it. I think adding lighting and shadows to the illustration to create the mood is very, very, very important. Just like the details that you add, playing around with light. What I'm doing here is using another technique. So I'm going to create the neon sign that's going to go on top of the building. So I'm doing it a little bit differently. So I'm creating it on the front on a normal plane without the enable planes feature turned on. I'm adding an effect, another glow effect to each piece of the neon. So I'm duplicating each piece of the neon. It's easier to create, less time consuming. Then I'm gonna build the sticks, again duplicating it to make it easier, and some small splashes on each side of it. This can even be a GIF at the end of it. And now what I'm gonna do is select the whole group and choose fit in plane. And it's gonna automatically put my image on a plane that I want. It's a pretty amazing feature, and it's gonna make your process much more faster. So what I'm doing here is creating a rectangle, and then with the corner tool I'm making the bottom of it rounder, which I could have done for the sign. Now that I think of it, maybe I found my own answer for that. So for the lighting on the box, I just wanted to reflect the bars too there. So I'm just duplicating the bars and masking it inside the light. As you can see, it's like I'm going from object to object and keep adding stuff to it. So now I'm adding some detail to the sidewalk. I'm gonna switch the font just because I want something a bit chunkier and meaty. So I'm gonna choose Gill Sans for both of the signs. And I'm also gonna thicken the neon. I want it to be a little thicker than it is at the moment. Now what I'm gonna do is build the inside of the building. Again, I don't want to give it too much detail. Just a hint that there's stuff inside the building. While I'm adding these signs and these neons, I'm also thinking this would look really cool as a small GIF. So maybe that's something that I'm gonna try at the end, just turning off maybe the splashes or turning on the A in ramen and trying to play around with that. I think that's gonna look cool. I'm really fascinated by Japanese culture. I think they're visually very rich, and I mean, with COVID it's gonna be impossible to go there, but hopefully once this is done, that's on my bucket list for sure. So I'm just building a few simple shapes inside the store. Again, I don't want it to be too noisy. I'm even not using too many contrasting colors. I want it to be very subtle so that the focus is on the outside of the building. Again, using the corner tool to create that glass over there. I really love when an illustration has these hidden details and you keep looking at stuff and, oh, there's another interesting thing that I didn't notice the first time I looked at it. And I really like adding these kinds of things to my work. I also sometimes love adding Easter eggs to these things. One of my favorite things to do, and now I regret not adding it here, but one of my favorite things to do is just add my cat, Sheila, to my illustrations. If you go and look at my work, you'll find her everywhere. It's just a black cat randomly placed in my illustrations. So just go and look for her. So again, I'm adding some final touches. One of the things that I'm doing here is making the AC, changing the color on the AC so that it reflects the neon a little bit more. And now I'm gonna add, again with the Gaussian blur effect, I'm gonna add a bit of light to the bottom, to the top of the building so that it reflects neon too. And finally, I'm going to use the Assets panel on Affinity Designer to add a Wi-Fi icon to the sign there. You can see there's a lot of options in there, so I'm just going to use and place it there. It even has Wi-Fi. I don't think they're open for COVID, but they might have takeaway. I'm gonna have to call them and ask them. We're almost there. Just a few more details. There are a lot of more things that I could keep on doing here, but we would end up with a 3-hour video. So I'm looking at it. I still can see a few different things that I could do, but I don't want to bore you with this, so I'm just gonna keep it here. I mean, this app is pretty amazing and powerful. I can do anything here. I don't feel like there's any limitations by using it on the iPad. And for someone that likes to do a lot of isometric illustrations, this is a real lifesaver. I basically added an adjustment layer, and in this case, I added a curve to the top of each of all of the layers, so it applies everywhere. And I'm just slightly adjusting it, see what feels right, just that it looks a little bit more bright. And this is the final illustration. I really hope you liked it and it was helpful and you learned something from it. And it was a pleasure to be invited to participate in this event. I'll see you next time.